Well, good morning. We had a wonderful Zoom meeting yesterday, and a lot of you brought your Mrs. Theacs that were flat. I can't wait to see some of the places you take me and the adventures that we have. Today I would like to continue to read Flat Stanley. We read part of this in our meeting yesterday, but I want to read it on here so that you can hear it more clearly. You know that the boy went for a ride in an envelope or an envelope, and now we were talking about how he was all rolled up, and we're going to find out why that is. Mr. Lambchop had always liked to take the boys off with him on Sunday afternoons, to a museum or roller skating in the park, but it was difficult when they were crossing streets or moving about in crowds. Stanley and Arthur would often be jostled from side to side. Jostled means that you get bumped by people or by objects, you get bumped around. And Mr. Lambchop worried about speeding taxis or that hurrying people might accidentally knock them down. They must have a lot more people where they live. They live in a city, so there's speeding cars. They're called taxis that pick people up and take them other places. But he was a little worried about that. It was easier after Stanley got flat. Mr. Lambchop discovered that he could roll Stanley up without hurting him at all. He would tie a piece of string around Stanley to keep him from unrolling and make a little loop for the string for himself. It was as simple as carrying a parcel. A parcel is like a package. And he could hold on to Arthur with the other hand. Stanley did not mind being carried because he never much liked to walk. Arthur didn't like to walk either, but he had to, and that made him mad. Remember, Arthur is the little brother. One Sunday afternoon in the street, they met an old college friend of Mr. Lambchop's. A man had not seen them for years. "Well, George, I see you bought some wallpaper. You going to decorate your house, I suppose?" "Wallpaper," said Mr. Lambchop. "Oh, no, this is my son, Stanley." You can see him, he's poking at it with his cane. He's got a dog on a leash there. But Stanley's all rolled up, and look at Arthur. Oh, Arthur's like, I don't want to walk. He undid the string, and Stanley unrolled. Let me show you this little picture here. See how he's all rolled up and the string goes around him? "How do you do?" Stanley said. "Nice to meet you, young fellow," the man said. And he said to Mr. Lambchop, "George, your boy is flat." "He's smart, too," Mr. Lambchop said. "Stanley is third from the top of his class at school." "Phooey," said Arthur. "This is my younger son, Arthur, Mr. Lambchop, and he will apologize for being so rude." Arthur could only blush and apologize. I wonder what's going on with Arthur. Mr. Lambchop rolled Stanley up again, and they set out for home. It rained quite hard when they were on their way. Stanley, of course, hardly got wet at all. Just around the edges, but Arthur was soaked. How do you think Arthur feels? They've given a few clues. He was mad about walking. He was rude to the man who was from college. Maybe he's a little jealous because Arthur is not getting all the attention right now, but Stanley is. Late that night, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop heard a noise out in the living room. They found Arthur lying on the floor near the bookcase. He had piled a great many volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica up on himself. "Put some more on me," Arthur said when he saw them. "Don't just stand there. Help me." Look at poor Arthur. Why would he be putting the books on top of him? On top of himself? Why would he do that? Yes, it's because he wants to be flat too. He's feeling jealous. Have you ever felt jealous before? You wanted something that someone else had and made you a little angry. You just really wanted that attention or the whatever they had. That's what's going on with Arthur. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop sent him back to bed, but the next morning they spoke to Stanley. "Arthur can't help being jealous," they said. "Be nice to him. He is." your little brother, after all. Being a big brother or sister is a hard job sometimes. Stanley and Arthur were in the park. The day was sunny, but windy too. And many older boys were flying beautiful, enormous kites with long tails made in all colors of the rainbow. The word enormous means huge or big. Arthur sighed. Someday, he said, I will have a big kite, and I will win a kite flying contest and be famous like everyone else. Nobody knows who I am these days. Stanley remembered what his parents had said. He went to a boy whose kite was broken and borrowed a large spool of string. You can fly me, Arthur, he said. Come on. He attached the string to himself and gave Arthur the spool to hold. I want to show you that they're putting this together. See how he's got that string and it's wrapped around like a kite? This is little Arthur, and he's got the long tail. So they borrowed that from a boy's kite who had been broken. So they're going to try to make a new kite out of Stanley. He ran lightly across the grass, sideways to get up some speed, and then he turned to meet the breeze. Up, 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 up went Stanley, being a kite. He knew just how to manage the gusts of wind. He faced full into the wind if he wanted to rise and let it take him from behind, and when he wanted speed. He only had to turn his thin edge of the wind very carefully, a little at a time, so that it did not hold him, and then he would slip gracefully down toward the earth again. Arthur let out all of the string, and Stanley soared high above the trees. It was a beautiful sight in his green sweater and brown trousers. Trousers. Do you know what that word means? It's another word for pants. Against the pale blue sky, everyone in the park stood to watch. Now here's everyone in the park. The policemen are watching too. And there is Arthur. And let's follow that string all the way up. And there he is with his green sweater and his brown trousers. That tail helps him to be in his direction up there. Also gives it a little bit of a weight to the kite. I love to fly kites very much. And did you notice when I said up, up, up? Look how the word got bigger. It went up, up, up. Really big. Stanley swooped right and then left in a long match swoops. He held his arms by his sides and zoomed at the ground like a rocket, and curved up again toward the sun. He side-slipped and circled, and he made figure eights and crosses and a star. Nobody had ever flown the way Stanley Landchop flew that day. No one probably ever will again. After a while, of course, people grew tired of watching, and Arthur got tired of running about with an empty spool. Stanley went right on, though, showing off. 3 boys came up to Arthur and invited him to join them for a hot dog and some soda pop. Arthur left the spool wedged in the fork of a tree. He did not notice, while he was eating the hot dog, that the wind was blowing and the string was tangled about in the tree. Now, a fork in the tree is not something you eat with, like a fork. A fork in a tree means like one part of the tree goes one way and the other one goes another way. And right in the middle, that's where the fork of the tree is. Sometimes it can have 2 or 3 or more. But a fork is that point in the tree where parts of it go in different directions. It's not a fork we eat with, though. The string got shorter and shorter, but Stanley did not realize how low he was until the leaves brushed his feet. And then it was too late. He got stuck in the branches. 15 minutes passed before Arthur and the other boys heard his cries and climbed up to set him free. I want to show him to you. Look how he's all tangled about in that tree. This bird over here, maybe he's trying to keep him company. It doesn't look like he's being much help. 15 minutes is a long time when you're afraid or you're frustrated. Stanley would not speak to his brother that evening and at bedtime. And even though Arthur had apologized, he was still cross. Cross means when your eyebrows come together, get a little angry. Alone with Mr. Lambchop in the living room, Mrs. Lambchop sighed and shook her head. "You're at the office all day having fun," she said, "and you don't realize what I go through with these boys. They're very difficult." "Kids are like that," Mr. Lambchop said. "Phases. Just be patient, dear." Mr. and Mrs. O.J. Dart, J. Dart, that's a neat name, lived in the apartment above the Lambchops. Mr. Dart was an important man and the director of a famous museum of art downtown in the city. Stanley Lambchop had noticed in the elevator that Mr. Dart, who was ordinarily a cheerful man, that means he was usually pretty happy, had become quite gloomy, sad maybe, frustrated, a little bit upset. But he had no idea what the reason was. And then at breakfast one morning, he heard Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop talking about Mr. Dart. "I see," said Mr. Lambchop. He's reading the paper over this cup of coffee. "That still another painting has been stolen from the famous museum." A Toulouse-Lautrec. This is Mr. Lambchop having his paper with his cup of coffee. And remember, Mr. J. Dart, he worked for the museum, and he was the director, which means he's in charge of it. And somebody stole one of his paintings. Now, we study art in our class, and we know who Jackson Pollock is, and we know who Manet is, and Monet, and Picasso. We've done lots of those things, but this one is a Toulouse-Lautrec, and this is an important painting, and it came up missing. So Mrs. Lambchop sipped her coffee. That probably made it easy to steal. Being too loose, I mean. It says Toulouse is the artist's name, Mrs. Lambchop. Oh, it says, Mr. Lambchop that went on, that Mr. O.J. Dart, the director, is at his wit's end, which means he's terribly frustrated. The police are no help. They don't have any clues. Listen to what the police chief told the newspaper. "We suspect a gang of thieves, sneak thieves," they said. "These are the worst kind. They work by sneakery, which makes them very difficult to catch. However, my men and I will keep trying. Meanwhile, I hope the people will still buy tickets for the policeman's ball and not park their cars where the signs say not to." The next morning, Stanley Lambchop heard Mr. Dart talking to his wife in the elevator. "These sneaky thieves at work at night," Mr. Dart said. "It's very hard for our guards to stay awake. And when they have been on duty all day, they are tired. And the famous museum is so big that we cannot guard every picture at the same time. I fear that it is hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. So someone's stealing all of these paintings." Suddenly, as if an electric light bulb had lit up in the air above his head, giving a little shooting lines of excitement, Stanley Lambchop had an idea, and he told it to Mr. Dart. Look at his idea. It's a big, bright idea. What do you think Stanley's idea is going to be to help catch the sneaky thieves that keep taking all of the paintings? Well, that's where I'm going to leave you. I'm going to put my Mrs. Thiak in my page where I left off. Do you remember what we call that when we put something in our book or we're not done quite reading it? A bookmark. I'm going to put her right in there. I'm going to close the book, but I want to leave your mind open so you can think about what you think the plan's going to be. How is Flat Stanley going to be able to help the museum director catch those sneaky thieves? I'm not giving any more clues. I'll see you later. Have a great day. Bye-bye.